Hey all, thanks for joining me. This evening I am in talking with my son Niko. You all are familiar with him because he comes on our live streams once in a while. We have our live streams on the weekly wrap-ups of the war. Tonight we're going to be talking about the perspective from a Cradle Orthodox instead of what we usually do, which usually here is the converts. But this is going to be Niko's story as a Cradle Orthodox, how he grew up in the Orthodox faith, what he's learned from it, how he has grown in it, the questions he had, through his junior high teenagers, when most kids are questioning what's going on anyway. He did at the same time. And I'm just going to allow him to start on wherever he feels comfortable. Niko, wherever you want to start.
Okay. Uh, yeah, so this was an idea that I had lobbed towards my mother as something to cover, um, mainly because I've had certain personal concerns, and as my mom said, that while there are a lot of stories about converts coming to the uh, faith and such, we don't hear a lot from Cradle Orthodox, and me being one of them, there was things that I wanted to share because I've had a pretty long journey already with the church, and I should say with Christ and his saints. So I guess, to kind of just start, I've always had while I won't get into details, I've always had a very um, close relationship with God and especially my patron Saint Nicholas. Um, and that had continued to develop as I had gotten older. But when I reached high school, I was in a Mennonite high school, and while it was very good, you become surrounded by a lot of different Protestants, and the things that they were teaching about what Christianity uh, is and what was expected of people um, differed a lot from what I was hearing as I was going to church and hearing from things from the saints and such, and of course, homilies in the church. So there was a lot of confusion, and I often brought my Orthodox study Bible with me and, was comparing and doing things. And eventually I had kind of gotten to the point where I was beginning to wonder, what is even the point of all of this? You know, um, Christianity just seems to be something that anybody can interpret, that anybody can just make whatever they want. And I was really starting to become very, just, I guess you could say, disillusioned with Christianity. And I was beginning to wonder, well, what makes Orthodoxy so legitimate? You know, uh, I mean, all these other Christian groups, supposed Christian groups, say, a whole number of things. I mean, I've heard so many outlandish things
Mhm.
in high school, and while, I have nothing against the people, they were all really, wonderful. Uh, I think their portrayals of Christ and his teachings definitely, and I should say their understanding of what needed to be in the church and what shouldn't be, definitely had me raising an eyebrow more than once. So, anyways, I eventually stumbled upon a book from Father Seraphim, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, and I read through it, and that really helped set things straight. I would say the most important thing was that it definitely just made it very obvious that the church values a certain order and way of things. That, while they're, when we meet people where they're at, that's one thing. But when it comes to what the church teaches and carries out and, is supposed to remember, it's very strict. So that helped really anchor me and realize, okay, this is the real faith because here is a man who can lay things out, not just spiritually, but take that spirituality and do it logically and basically make all these argumentative points.
You're talking about Father Seraphim Rose.
Yes, Father Seraphim Rose. And he does that for someone like me who's also thinks of through things very logically and does a lot of debating and things like that. That really resonated with me because I think there's certain people that I think need more of Father Seraphim Rose's approach to explain things. So anyways, that really brought me in. I got close and there was things that I, took on from there and I became a very hard advocate for certain things in Christianity. I began to view those there as not real Christians. Um, I have a very harsh view that I don't think um, Protestants or Catholics are really in the same group as we are. I just don't believe that after things I had read. Um, I think Orthodoxy is the only real Christianity, and every other form is some sort of imitation or an attempt to reach it. Again,
Hmm.
this is nothing, this has nothing to do with about the people personally. I'm just talking about the institutional structure of these other churches, quote unquote. Um, so that's what I'm talking about when I say that. This isn't to um, get
So
on
kind of like
anyone
the
person.
theology and the doctrines and all that. Yeah.
Yes. Again, this has nothing to do, this is not personal attacks against anybody. This is just speaking purely from a structural kind of um, point of view. So, um, then, there was a time I had been considering monasticism and other things of, dedicating myself more seriously. And, well, things didn't quite go in that direction for right now. That isn't to say it can't happen later or whatever. The point is, that was something that I went to and I wanted to look into, and I got to visit a monastery in New Mexico, and it gave me an idea of what the monastic life was like.
What did you learn from that experience?
Well, it's kind of hard to because as time goes on, my how I've viewed that experience has shifted into different ways than when I first got out. When I first got out, I was thinking, "Oh, this is it. This is what I want." But I think, I think I was saying that at the time because of the pressure from, my father, who was pretty abusive and such. And I think in a lot of ways, of course, I liked the monastery because while there was discipline and such, it wasn't abusive kind of discipline and
Right.
behavior. And so I think in a way I was seeing that as a form of relief and freedom from that oppressive atmosphere at
Hmm.
home.
Yeah.
So as I've gotten better and I'm away from that now and I look back, I think more of the message that I learned there was the structure of the faith, even when those within Orthodoxy aren't keeping it. And that because COVID happened soon after I left that monastery.
Yes, because you went in February of 2020. So
Hmm.
right
Yep.
before really the lockdowns and all that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And there was some experiences at the church I was attending that, let's just say, once again, I was in the same position that I was in my high school, wondering, this all just seems like a farce to me. And while I still believe in my personal connection, and while I don't want to get into that because it's personal to me and I don't want to publicize it, um, basically, I've had very personal things that I've experienced,
Spiritual experiences, right?
spiritual experiences, yes. So those have always anchored me in something. But my issue right now is the church. And it's been like that since COVID, except, of course, and I want to clarify, um, when I went down to Louisiana and I got to meet a priest in a church there,
And
and
you were
now that
there,
priest,
you went down there to visit my mother at the
mhm,
time to help her.
I was helping her with some things and such, yes. And so, but while I was down there doing that, I got in touch with the priest there of a local parish, and now he's my spiritual father. During COVID, he did a lot of things. And when I was hearing the parishioners talk about how much they thought he was, what he did during COVID, really not falling in line with all this stuff that the government was doing. Or, if he did follow certain things, he compensated by like, oh, okay, we can only have so many in the church. Well, fine, we'll hold two liturgies then, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. So, we can have half the church come in now and everybody can sign up. So everybody can still come to church, even when they're limiting those things. So his view was, well, if they're going to do this, then, I need to work harder. And he refused to wear a mask at all in the church, and he didn't force anyone else to wear them either. It was up to their own discretion. And the parishioners there were really impressed with the way he was leading the church during that time. And I remember just thinking, man, I wish I was here at this church when that was going on, because where I was before, there was this feeling of everything was just fake.
Mm.
Oh, you can't kiss icons. Oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. Oh, you got to be careful. We got to have a mask on and around,
Right, right.
the Eucharist. All of this, I was like, well, do we even really believe in God? Does Christ even really exist? Because the way you're acting and makes me think that you don't really actually believe these things, but you're telling us to believe them. But
Right.
here's the thing for me, and this is where my logical side comes in. Um, the thing is that I need to see someone doing these things and carrying them out for it to register for me. If I don't see the leadership or the people in that parish doing the things that are they say that they believe, I won't believe. I can't believe that that part of the institutional part of religion or whatever is being sincere. And for me, I can't help but be pretty skeptical of things and question. So, where I'm at now, I had to come back. I had to leave Louisiana. I had to come back to where I am now. And I returned with my mother and was helping her with some things and such like that. But the point is that uh, I kept trying to go to this parish that, I was going to before, and I just stopped going after a while. Um, I stopped going, and I haven't been going to church at all, really, for several months now. And I don't say that without heartache, because I don't want to be away from the church, but there is this sense here of where I'm living that Orthodoxy feels very individualistic. It's more about the individual. I suffer from, and I don't want to get into details, but there are certain things that I struggle with mentally, um, that impact certain things, of course, spiritually, um, and whatnot. That when I was in Louisiana at that parish, those things were taken very seriously, and there was this feeling that the church reached out to me when I was struggling. I don't have that at all here. I
No,
have to
no
make,
support system.
yeah, I have to make all the efforts all the time. And if you can't, well, shame on you. You're a disappointment. And to be quite blunt, I'm a little tired of hearing that. I've been hearing that most of my life from my family, uh, parts of my family, I should clarify. And I don't exactly want to continue to feel that or hear that here, in the church. So, because, even before the church in Louisiana, there was the one in Pennsylvania that I really liked the priests there. I had a great support network. Um, there was just so much there for me, even outside the church. There was support in certain places. Um, and I guess the thing that I've come to realize is that the church is actually funny. I was talking to one of the people that I'm still in touch with from the parish in Pennsylvania, and she said to me that, well, an important part of the church is also the community. That, if you don't have a healthy community, then who's going to want to go to the church there? It's not just the sacraments. It isn't all just that. All of those are very important, of course. But, you know, when I think about, let's say, like when we think about elders and the saints, people gravitated to them because they saw Christ in them.
Mm.
Look at all the people that swarmed around Christ when he was on this earth. There should be a natural magnetic draw. And I felt that in Pennsylvania and in Louisiana. It was like you couldn't keep me away from there. I was wanting to be at that church, those churches almost all the time. Um, in fact, it felt odd when I wasn't there for a while. It felt uncomfortable. But here, I don't feel that. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. So I don't know if we want to pause here for a minute and you want to ask me anything before I go
Um,
on.
no, I was thinking about what you said, how you said there's a draw, that kind of brings you into the church. There's this connection,
Hmm.
and I hadn't really thought about that, even though that's just natural. You're gonna
Hmm.
be feel that way. It's kind of like when you go to new churches. You either feel you're welcomed or you feel comfortable in that space or you don't.
Hmm.
So I can understand it. I just had not heard it in that way, and I find that very interesting
Hmm.
that it drew you in.
Hmm.
But I mean, I can see that. Um, there's a warmth to certain churches
Hmm.
that really do make you feel like you're part of it, you're welcome, and that you are in a family. I have
Hmm.
actually had that. In fact, the church that your spiritual father, Father Daniel, down in Shreveport, uh, way back when your dad and I were dating and married, we were going to that church. And
Hmm.
so I knew when you went down there and we had to move, and this was during the divorce, but I knew, and I had told you, I said, "Oh, you're going to like Father Daniel. You're really going to, I think you're really going to like him." And
Hmm.
basically, you're going to click with him. I just had that feeling.
Hmm.
And it was right. You did have that, and thank God, because it's sometimes really hard to find spiritual fathers like that. So,
Yeah. Father Daniel feels a lot. He feels very monastic in his presence as a priest. And I felt that with Father Hector back in Pennsylvania as well at Annunciation. Um, to me, I've been around enough priests now that I can tell which ones are the really good ones. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. So
because you're actually looking for an actual guide, a spiritual father, an actual father to help you where you don't have the support system here. And I get that. Yeah.
yeah. Um, a part of me also feels, to kind of broaden the scope, as you know, for those that have been watching for a while, my mom's stuff, she has gone on about things that are going on in the church. And yes, I am paying attention to that also when she brings it to my attention. And then there are certain things I discover on my own time that I find out. And admittedly, a lot of this sort of news does not make me feel any more comfortable or grounded, especially in the Greek Archdiocese of the Church. I have some issues with aspects of the Russian Church in certain things. I think I've mentioned it on this channel before on something. But even then, I think they are in better shape than the Greek Archdiocese. Um, and I guess,
And why do you think that? Do you think it's because of, um, I mean, what is the difference? Curious, that you could explain why you think that the Russian church is in better shape.
well, I think they actually pay attention to what are, the great, fathers of the early church had been teaching. There's a lot of, one of the things, like, for example, one of the things that I ended up reading through Father Daniel's guidance was The Soul After Death from Father Seraphim Rose.
Mm.
And it was a really great book talking about how the toll houses, the whole teaching of that, while that is not, you know, dogma and, doctrine, doesn't mean it isn't a teaching of the church. Um, and he was saying how all these early, all these saints that we listen to everything else they say, but then the Greek church is like, oh no, that's optional, you don't have to believe it or whatever. And as I remember what Father Seraphim Rose said on that. He said, well, yes, depending on the person, it may not be wise to tell them about that. Just like if someone's about to die and they're in bad state and you tell them all about hell and everything and whatnot, and that could make it more
Yeah.
spiritually damaging for them or more distressing. You don't, the spiritual father wouldn't tell them that. They would tell them about heaven and all those things and trying to keep them focused on that.
Mm.
Um, but that doesn't mean we don't believe in hell. That doesn't mean, we don't believe that's an actual state of being or, place or whatever. So he was saying that the church should be teaching these things. It is a teaching. And for me, it was pretty impactful because I had always been, and because of things that I'd been struggling with, I always thought, well, why do we care, about when we die? I mean, if God's just going to judge us and he's so merciful, you know, and we just be sincere, who cares how I die or whatever.
Mm.
It was,
Mm.
I had a hard time making sense of it.
Ugh.
So when Father Seraphim Rose really explained the toll houses in the sense of, because, there's some people that visualize it as this literal toll houses. That's not what it means. It's more, these places during, the time after death that your guardian angel, escorts you through, and these demons of different passions stop you on the way and try to bring you down. And that's what that's supposed to refer to because it's a metaphor. It's supposed to help you visualize it. And when I learned that, I grew very sober on the concept of death because I realized, oh, if it's the demons, taking me away, and that, like, this isn't just Christ's judgment, this is, you know, are you spiritually strong enough to pass through these passions? Then I'm like, oh, well, you
It's kind
know,
of a test
mm-hmm.
to,
Because,
were you doing this in your life? Were you actually trying to
mm-hmm,
overcome those
mm-hmm,
sins or the passions?
yeah. And then it clicked for me why so many of the saints were like, oh, I need more time. I need more time to struggle all this. It all made sense to me, especially when Father Seraphim Rose was laying all that out on how the saints viewed all that and why it was important. And I remember having a discussion with my spiritual father. I was very upset. I said, this teaching really helped set a lot of things straight for me on how I should be preparing myself for death. And I feel like I've been lied to by the church for not being transparent about this or acting like it's not important. And I think it's a very dangerous thing to not take this seriously. And for those of you who are like me that didn't understand before, I really do recommend looking at Father Seraphim Rose's book. It's not very long. The Soul After Death by Father Seraphim Rose. It's a really wonderful book that he breaks down all the different aspects of it and why it's important, not just preparing for death, but understanding the aerial powers and also pointing to scriptures where this mentions it in our hymnography, all these things in the church. It's not like it's not there. It's definitely been a belief, but for some reason we just act like it isn't. So,
Well, I think
um,
that the important thing I get out of that when I when you told me about it and I started to, read into it, I've done a couple of videos on it. I feel like it's important because it's so easy to become complacent.
mhm,
And
exactly.
so that is a preventative way from becoming complacent. To me, that's how I see it.
Well, to kind of err on the side of a little something darker here, but I think it's also important for people who deal with suicidal thoughts and explaining why the church views that as so damaging. It's not just a destruction of the body, but you know, y- if you understand the toll houses and the teachings of that, it means even more on why, to me, on why suicide is such a very grim fate, and why, it's really not something uh, we should really be striving to not give in to that, because, it does feel like a very deliberate way to ensnare someone. Um, so, yeah, I won't get into all the details on my thoughts on that. But so, so when I look at getting back to, aspects of the church, when I
So,
see,
so you're talking about the difference with the Greek and the
Mhm.
Russian. That's part of why you.
Well, even with the Antiochian church, which is what the Louisiana parish was, there was this sense that the bishop, even leading them in the church, had a very different mindset than the Greek one
Hmm.
did, like these Greek bishops and stuff. Um, so I'm not I'm not pleased with the Greek church, and I definitely have no desire to be a part of it, with the exception of the one in Pennsylvania, which was a Greek church, but that was an exception. And I'm sure there are other exceptions too. I'm not saying that every church in the Greek church is terrible. I don't believe that. I'm just saying I'm definitely going to be more wary going forward with them because of at least for right now, because of the current leadership behind
Mm,
it.
yeah.
So,
I think the way I look at it is, I mean, yes, each parish is different, so
mhm,
you have to go by that.
mhm,
You can't just say overall.
yep,
You can say yes, the archbishop isn't great as the of the diocese of
mhm,
the Greek Orthodox Church or the FANR.
mhm,
But when you're just speaking of going to local churches, you know, there's a lot of good Greek Orthodox
mhm,
parishes.
mhm,
However, if you just want to look at it generally, I would say, and I will say this, I admit I have never really been in a Russian Orthodox church. I have not, I've gone to an OCA church. I haven't even
mhm,
been to a ROCOR church. But I'm just saying, I feel like and maybe it's ignorant for me to say this since I haven't been there. I just go by what I've read and listened to of these particular priests and bishops, and I don't know. Sometimes I think that Rokhor and the Russian Church seem to uphold the traditions a bit more of what was passed down. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like they're more adherent
Hmm.
to what we're supposed to be doing. But like I
Hmm.
said, there are Greek churches that do that as well. I'm
Hmm.
just That's just my my
Hmm.
experience. But like I said, I haven't actually been in a church. I just go by reading their catechisms, reading their stories I've read on the bishops. That's that's where I got my information. I could be totally wrong, but that's just how I see it.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah.
just been to OCA, Greek, and Antiochian. So,
Another aspect that I'll get into and why I feel very, I should say, feeling a sense of disillusionment with Orthodoxy. I should say the the church. As some of you know, that when I've been on the live streams and stuff, and if you know my history, I've gotten during high school very attached to the Chinese people, to the Chinese culture, the language, all that. And then, what I've learned about the country, and I've continued to learn things about the country. And, you know, there's a part of me that when I see what China and even some, or, other Asian countries around, like in Southeast Asia and such, and the rules that they have on certain things concerning, things and worries about their own people that are actually spiritual concerns that we hear brought up in the church. And I was like, oh, and naturally my thought was, well, what Orthodox countries, what are their rules? They have Orthodoxy and that's their main thing. And if these Asian countries are so important, care so much about this stuff, surely we must too. And, I hate to say this, but from what I was reading up in a lot of these Orthodox countries, it came off to me, I have to be blunt, like a whole lot of show and not a whole lot of substance. Um, they did, Russia does this really easy thing on like the LGBT stuff. Oh, look how harsh we are on this and stuff. And I'm like, well, some of those things are a little over the top, in my opinion. And I think they're going to seed future problems because they come off as almost hateful, even though the church itself, tries to push back on that. But they are complicit with this by not trying to bring some sense of balance, which is a whole issue I have there. But then when it comes to things like pornography and stuff like this, so funny, they're against same-sex porn, but they'll allow heterosexual porn. So I'm like, but they're both the same. They're both terrible.
hmm
So, and the church speaks against this. So,
oh,
and of course the church says, oh, we need to push against these things too. Well, that's fine. But, when I hear things, oh, great holy Russia and all this, I'm like, I don't know. I think a lot of that sounds like political moves to me and propaganda leverage rather than actual legitimate, you know, concerns about spiritual health of their people. Because if they were, I think they'd be taking more notes from their next door neighbor, China, who, does talk regularly about spiritual pollution, does have a consistent, you know, uh, account and record of attempts and stuff. I mean, I was just seeing these things that just last year, someone was doing gangster stuff and was hurting a lot of people, had all this money, doing casino stuff. I mean, just a bunch of these people. And they were either thrown in prison for life or they were killed. And and of course in Orthodoxy we don't, you know, we're not saying to go out and kill people. We always want to be merciful. But the point is that they understand that when you're harming a lot of people, you have all this power. you need to be held to, very serious, standards. And I agree with that. And, I guess I just feel like when the Orthodox countries seem to tackle the things that are easiest to tackle, or they do things that won't be as controversial. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't agree. I think that the Orthodox Church the true Orthodox countries need to get their crap together and need to make the Orthodox Church and Orthodoxy, I should say, as the real main central focus, like China does for all its culture and things and its way of life. I want to see every Orthodox country do that in its own way that fits it somewhat similarly to China. And it's not going to look the same, of course, nor would I want it to. But the point I'm saying is, when I see a lot of these Eastern beliefs, in Orthodoxy being an Eastern belief, I'm expecting us to follow in terms of country and in religion along those same lines as Asia does. So when I
Well, I
don't see
mean,
that,
there's a somewhat of a separation though between the government and the church. It's not totally
yes, but
together.
I mean, China claims that too. But the point that I'm saying is the government still understands things that matter spiritually, that reflects a lot of their beliefs in Taoism and things like that, Buddhism, those two things, the focus on harmony, the Confucius teachings, a lot of them have a lot of focus on their cultural, historical stuff. That's what I'm expecting from Orthodox countries. You know what Orthodoxy teaches. So in those countries, I shouldn't be seeing porn allowed. I shouldn't be seeing certain things propagated around publicly. There should be fines, punishments, things like that for this sort of behavior. Uh, you know, because I'm not talking about saying I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not expecting them to wear this, this quote unquote flag, so to speak, of an Orthodox cross on it, saying, "Oh, we're doing this all in the name of Orthodoxy." That's not what I'm saying. What I'm asking is a country's culture and heritage should be reflected in the way that the government system carries out things, is what I'm trying to say. Just like how our American system has things that carries out that I don't like, but I think does accurately reflect a lot of how our system is with how in regards to money, power, individualism, things like that. It's not a surprise. So, I would hope that for countries like Greece, especially, I mean, I don't know where Greece's government's going with this, but it's been so proud of Orthodoxy, and we've been there. It was so nice to see the little roadside chapels and all that, and it was so beautiful, and the churches, and you could hear the services outside as you were walking by. It's such a wonderful experience. I loved that. Um, but yet the government seems to have no connection whatsoever to this great, wonderful heritage that it has. And it's just allowed these Western beliefs, things that have nothing to do with its culture and heritage, to just seep in.
Mm.
And I'm like, look, you all need to wake up and do what China did in the 80s when all that was happening, and they started realizing their culture was being overwritten by Western stuff. Stop it. You gotta say no. That's not who we are. And every country has a right to do that. So, anyways, this gets into a little bit of, I guess, philosophical stuff and political, but that's just what I believe. I want every country to be unique. I want every country to protect its language, its culture, its people. Um, you know, and that's what I expect, especially from Orthodox countries. Because remember, we're not, I was always told this, we're not a religion, we're a faith, it's a way of life.
Mm.
Well, all the more reason then that these Orthodox countries' leaderships should be showing that too, if it's a way of life. So,
Yes, that makes sense. And of course, really the only country that has in their laws or our constitution is the separation of church and state. There really isn't that mention that exact law or whatever in other countries
Hmm. Well,
equivalent
well,
to the
again, think
Catholic.
about how that came about and why they did that. It was understandable why they did that because you're talking about they came from Britain, where the king was so involved in the religious stuff that he believed he twisted religious power. He became so integrated into it for the Protestants that, you know, pardon me, he became
Were they
so,
Protestants or were those Anglicans?
well, that's all under the Protestant group,
Well,
classification.
yes, right, right.
But yes, Anglican and stuff, and I think some others. But the point is, that caused a lot of contention and problems because he was, you know, it's funny because that's what they accused the Tsar of, but the Tsar wasn't like that. There was, I mean, not that there weren't problematic czars, but the point is that he didn't have all this power over the church or the religious institutions, whereas, in my understanding, from what I recall in history in the UK, that was very much the case, where the king had a lot of say and sway over the Christian church there and what could or could not be done. So it's very different. So that's why they created the separation of church and state here, because they didn't want that happening
That makes
again.
sense. Yeah.
So understandable. It's just I personally don't believe in a complete separation. I think there should be, although, to be honest, as we're finding out, there isn't really a full separation. I mean, look how much the evangelicals have
Yeah,
sway.
that's what I was
So,
saying.
so my
It
view
really
is,
isn't happening with our
yeah,
our
well,
administrations.
I just don't think it's something that it's been tried so many times. I mean, look at the communists. They try to get rid of all this stuff. It just doesn't work. I think, a belief system is integral to whatever leadership is in place. And if you try to erase all that, what do you have? You don't have anything really, anything substantial that's going to ground you and your people for longevity. I mean, there's a reason why China's been around for so long. So,
Right.
anyways, I don't have a whole lot else to say. At this point, I think we'd just be going in circles. So,
Right. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. Where are you now? You said all that. I mean, is this at the position you're in right now? I mean, is this exactly where you are?
right now, how I feel, especially, being Holy Week, that happened last week and all that. Um, the only thing I can think of is I'm like, I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I was either, at my parish in Louisiana, or I wish I was in some place like China, which may surprise people, but I mean, it was funny because my Chinese teacher really thought I would love it there. He wanted me to actually go live there and be an English teacher. Um, and in a sense, I almost wish I could do that. Um, obedience is such an important thing, and I think the Chinese system teaches that. And of course, that isn't to say there aren't problems, but I think a lot of the things and the concerns they show, especially for their young people, and also their older people too, just their whole communities there, I would be willing to take on some adjustments and adapt to some things if it meant I was in a country that focused more also on the well-being of people's spiritual health as well as all these other things. So, but that's just how I feel now. And, I continue to research things. But so, anyways, I guess what I'm looking for is I wish I was in a country that felt more that spirituality was more of a central focus in some form, whatever that is. I'm not looking for a perfect display of it. I just wish it was more front and center.
And it seems to me that you're feeling like you need that kind of structure, those kind of guideposts in your life that you don't have.
Hmm. Well, that's why Mr. Fan was so important, my Chinese teacher. I became his protege. You know, and obedience got me very far, got me a lot of things. And, I had a lot of Chinese friends. And even when I look at people visiting China and I see, you know, Mr. Fan is right, when I see these people that don't even know how to speak Chinese, but they really try, the Chinese people are very humble and very welcoming. And, when you show humility, they really receive you. And Mr. Fan wasn't kidding. If you show humility and discards your pride, that's seen as very big over there, especially if you're an American. That's what otherwise they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, anyways, I don't want to make this all about China, but it's very clear that it's had a very deeply resounding effect on me. And, reading books of Orthodoxy in China has always also helped me really. I mean, the fact that the Chinese government, thanked us um, when a spiritual what was it? I can't remember now. Was it a bishop? I think it might have been a bishop that defended a Buddhist monastery from these, imperialist people. I think it was the Dutch or it was the Germans, one of the two that were there, and they um, they were trying to, ruin this Buddhist monastery. And this bishop had been staying there because they welcomed him and was like, "Oh, you can have this as a place to stay." Well, he went up and defended and, basically helped preserve that Buddhist monastery. And in thanks, the Chinese government gave us, and we still have this building today, this beautiful uh, Chinese architectural building, and it was given as a gift for, committing ourselves to the protection of the Chinese, beliefs and way of life.
That was a Russian
Hmm.
priest or bishop.
Yep. So, anyways, it was the those things. It shows me that the leadership in China can acknowledge these things and that Orthodoxy has a place there so long as it's respectful and, and integrates itself into China's way of life, which is what we're supposed to do as Orthodox anyways. So
Right.
anywhere, any place that it ends up being, I should say.
Right, right. Well, I find that very interesting. Um, I know that you've always had a strong faith, really, since you were young. You've had a connection, a spiritual connection. Kids tend to, the pureness of children, they tend to connect really well to God in any case. Um, their minds are innocent. They don't question a bunch of things. They don't become complicated in
Mm-hmm.
adulthood. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, I did see that with you when I was taking you to the adult ed classes at the church I go to years
Mm-hmm.
ago, probably around 2009 through 2012. I was an adult ed, and then I would take you with me, and you you would always like come up with to ask these questions, and the priest would
Mm-hmm.
be like, "Okay, what is it, Nicholas? What is it, Nicholas?" But it was good because you were very curious about a lot of things. And what's nice about Orthodoxy is you can ask a bunch of questions, and there's none of this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just is. There,
Yeah.
they don't have answers.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard this several times from people who grew up in Protestant churches. They never seem to have answers. They don't want to discuss it really. So that's a nice thing.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway, thanks for sharing all that with us. We really appreciate that because, we hear a lot from converts, so we don't hear much about Cradle Orthodox.
Yep. And, I wish all those who are coming into the church the best, but, have discernment. If you feel like something's off and it's not working, chances are the issue isn't orthodoxy, the issue is the parish you're going to. That's just the reality of it. So,
because it's all people.
yep. So don't
So,
be so don't be disheartened. I found hope someplace. I'm still in contact with my spiritual father, and he's helping me through this, and he is aware of, what I've been doing, and I have been going to the churches around here and such. So he's aware. Um, you know, so the point is that for converts and such, don't lose hope if there's something that isn't working out near you. Pray about it, keep searching. I've been praying about it for myself. So don't think it's only you if you're feeling that. Even I, who's been in Orthodoxy all my life, is feeling it. So don't be disheartened.
yes, that's really a good point. Good words to give to people coming into the church. Um, Always know that there's people in the church, so people are broken and they need God's healing, grace healing,
Mhm.
and so um, you just have to remember that uh, you look at the church fathers, you look at the saints, you look at the scriptures, you know what the church is about and is supposed
Mhm.
to be. So anyway, thanks so much for your time and for sharing all this, opening your heart and your soul and your mind to all that you did, Nicholas, and with such authenticity and sincerity. So appreciate that.
Of course,
I
you're
hope you
welcome.
all got something out of this. Perhaps maybe you feel some of what he's felt, or or you thought maybe you weren't allowed to feel anything like that. You think, oh
Mhm.
well, I can't do that. Again, questions, doubts, all that is allowed in Orthodoxy, but you always have your faith. You don't give up. You don't go into despair. You don't. I mean, we know all that. So
Mhm.
anyway, thanks so much for watching. Um, I hope you all have a blessed rest of your evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are.